Alex just invited me to come and speak with you all today, talk a little bit about scalability and some of my experiences and background. So to briefly introduce myself, so I've done a number of startups in the past. I started at Facebook, went back to school, finished up my degree in computer science at Harvard. Then I came to Spain and was the CTO of Tuenti. And then currently I'm doing a product called Worlytics as a startup that I've just begun this year, and I'm working on building that out. So some old school day photos. This is the original team at Facebook, and this is the original team at Tuenti. So we've got Felix over there back in the day. So fun old times. Briefly, what I'm doing now is Worlytics. So we're aggregating a bunch of data from tools that companies use, putting that into an analytics platform, combining it with performance feedback, and trying to give like a view on what everyone in your organization and team is doing, and an analysis of that. So that's the concept we're working towards currently. And what I want to talk to you about today is a little bit about the types of scalability things that startups have to deal with. And I think an important aspect to think about in scalability is not just your platform, the infrastructure and the code, but also the people, how you scale your team, how you grow your organization and structure and process to try and deal with how large you guys are getting. Because I know, job and talent, like I've seen you guys grow so much recently, and I'm sure you've all been dealing with the challenges of scaling and dealing with a bigger team, how you need to change your meetings and your process and how you work with each other to support that bigger structure and allow you to do more faster going forward. So I'm just going to give a few quick tips and observations that I've had at the different companies I've worked with, and then I'm happy to take questions or anything else you guys would like to ask me about at the end. So my first one, I think this is the biggest thing when you're scaling and growing your team, is you need to really empower people and delegate. So you need to create a lot of sense of not bottlenecking any team or any person with a lot of process, but really finding ways to make sure that everything can run forward in parallel, and that you can give people clear areas of responsibility in which they can execute, and you give them the tools they need to work quickly in those areas. So that's the general point there. And then the second bit is more of a infrastructure point of view. So partitioning wisely. I mean, when you set up your infrastructure, set up your data stores, the early decisions you make about how to partition things really impact your scalability. And making sure that you choose sort of items of data or ways to partition units that are going to be fairly constant in size with respect to time and with respect to how you're scaling in terms of number of users or something like that. So choosing wisely what your partitioning is going to be, and certainly considering the locality of data that's going to be used together, making sure your partitioning scheme tries to group that together for efficiency, and to be wary of creating hotspots. So trying to avoid organizing data together that's going to be used sort of too intensely across your application by sort of scripts or concurrency. Examples being like at Tuenti, for example, events, right? Where we're always sort of a scalability hotspot because an event would get a lot of people concurrently attacking it at one time. So those sorts of things can be a constraint if you don't partition that wisely. And in general, I mean, when partitioning, always thinking about the user and sort of what the data related to a user is a good way to have a unit of partitioning. Cool. So the next thing I think is super important is a really good culture of code review. Apart from being a way to ensure quality of code, I think it's also a really important thing to share knowledge and promote sort of constructive technical discussions around real code issues. And it's a good way to sort of empower people because if you can, it scales in parallel. You can have people. Once you set a good culture of code review and a good culture of the standards that you need to use, it really can be a scalable process that expands to your team and can operate in parallel. So then the fourth point, I think it's really important that, and I mean a lot of startups are doing it these days, but is testing and continuous integration. And this is really important to being able to have a lot of teams all working and all contributing to the product. Is that you make sure you use continuous integration so you can iterate quickly, and that you have proper good testing so that you can trust that code that passes the test isn't going to break things once it actually goes up. So, I don't believe in being sort of totally dogmatic about testing, that you need like 100% coverage, because 100% coverage still doesn't mean that you're covering all the appropriate logical cases, and things can work differently in production. But nonetheless, I think having a genuine commitment to testing that allows you to trust that what code you're putting up is going to work is really important to allowing you to move forward quickly in parallel. And 5, I think this is something that people don't talk about much, but technical debt isn't always a terrible thing. It sometimes can be okay. I mean, if you think about it, like startups are built with some forms of debt, and so sometimes in order to keep releasing product, you need to incur some amount of technical debt, and sometimes it's not even debt you have to necessarily pay off, right? Because you have business needs can change, and you might have a feature that ends up getting thrown away, and so doing something that's quick in a proof of concept and get something out and released and lets you learn about how it's going to be used might be important to do before you implement a perfectly polished, great code, always scalable type solution. It's important to make sure what you're actually going to need, and think about that, and incur sort of technical debt related to your products when it makes sense and where it makes sense, and make good decisions about that. And then teaching. So one thing that I think that a lot of companies don't spend enough time on is thinking how they're teaching new people to join the company. I mean, when you have new people joining, obviously you're sort of desperate. You want more people, more hands, get them working on code as quickly as possible, which is good, but you need to make sure you're also taking the time to sort of create a curriculum or create some sort of a program that's going to get them up to speed, make sure they're learning stuff in the right way, and that they get up to speed as quickly as possible. So really making an effort to think about teaching, to value how the more senior people are mentoring and bringing new people up to speed, I think is quite important. And in some sense, you might be trading sort of a little bit of speed and execution, because your senior people have to take some time today to mentor new people who aren't going to be as productive, but hopefully over the longer term, that allows you to move faster. And then sort of the last point I have is be careful about prematurely optimizing. A lot of people, when they're working on sort of small projects, tend to view scalability and writing great code as writing stuff that's really efficient and really fast in like a single execution, and that's not really the most important thing. The most important thing is that it's scalable, that execution time is going to be fairly constant, and it's going to be pretty stable over time, not necessarily that it's the fastest thing. So I would encourage you to, before you necessarily spend time coming up with some like super elegant loop for certain things, that you think about whether those, like how often that code is going to be hit, how much those milliseconds matter versus your time moving on to something else and the next feature and the next thing. So as long as it's scalable, sometimes it's definitely worth not having it be like the most absolutely perfect tight loop, but something that can be that will ship the product, and then you can always come back, and if those milliseconds matter, you can work on optimizing that in the future. Cool. So those were just a few initial tips and like my observations on scalability. I'm happy to sort of take some questions, answer anything you guys want about my experiences in the past, and anything you guys want to discuss. So cool. Yeah.
So you had two slides. One of them was actually teaching, and the other one was about code reviews.
Yeah.
Do you reckon that code reviews are tools for teaching, or could they be
Yeah, absolutely.
for teaching?
Yeah, I think code reviews are very good for teaching, right? Stuff that I think it's very difficult to have like a wiki and maintain like documentation on exactly how you want people to do stuff and to rely on them to read it and to keep that up to date. And so I think code review is a critical point for catching that and catching where people don't know the best approach or don't have that. So yeah, I think absolutely that's an important aspect of teaching. And yeah.
How do you that shared knowledge? Because for example, if five or six senior people are the ones that sort of pave the way to how things should be done, how do you
Yeah.
make a reference? Is it all in a reference in the people's heads, or because we're at this stage?
Yeah.
We're trying to put a reference.
Yeah, I think it does end up all being in people's heads to some degree, and I think this is a challenge. Like, people in really big companies like Google and Facebook, etc., like still talk about this as. Oh yeah, I'm gonna leave it there. It's still a problem for them that they have people like re-implementing the same sort of library or functionality in several different places because people don't know that the other thing exists. And code review can catch that, but yeah, I think that's always a challenge. Personally, I'm a fan now of doing like trying to write documents when you write like code documentation, just to do it directly in the code, like even sort of overall like design documents, put them under your source control so that they can kind of evolve with the code itself. I think it's difficult if you have external like wikis or external or Google Docs speccing out technical implementations. Those usually get stale very quickly, and so a good way to like try and keep people knowledgeable is if the spec is directly in the repo, then it's in this. When people look at the history, then it's been changed at the same time, and they can find it. It's with the pull request, and it's a little bit easier to sort of keep that in place and find. But yeah, I think it's always a challenge to have like the knowledge of senior people and the institutional knowledge that they carry dispersed to the team. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you think that the onboarding process should be like? You arrive to the office the first day and you like this documentation, read it, or more something like pair programming for the first days?
Yeah, I think a little bit of pair programming works. I think fixing bugs is usually a fairly interesting way if you're going to dive people right in. But yeah, normally I think a little bit of documentation to start, just on your general approach and tools to use, and then try and give people what they need to start working on a specific sort of task in a narrow area, and then do like pair programming to help walk them through sort of how you would approach it, and then let them do it, and then review their code, and then keep iterating from that and expand the scope of tasks they're working with over time. I don't really necessarily like to sit and do pair programming just with them through the entire thing, but it's often easier to just discuss with them an approach and like have a discussion and say, okay, like I would go about it this way, I would sort of take this approach and then discuss that, and then let them go and actually write all the code, and then asking questions, of course. But yeah, that would be my approach. Cool. Yeah. Cool. Other questions? Sergio?
You were talking about technical debt. Is it okay to assume how much technical debt?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I think it's an art more than a science, right? I think you never know like what's going to come back. But yeah, I think the only problem is like as an engineer, I know my like personality is that I want to like do everything really great, right? And you want to only like release stuff that's really polished, but also we all know that requirements change, right? And like, so sometimes you might, if you spend a lot of time making something that's absolutely perfect, but then like the business requirements change in a couple weeks or a month or something like that, then it's not really worth having done that. So I think that's the type of thing you have to understand and think about, and sort of it's not so bad to have a little bit of a suboptimal solution, that you can always come back to if it becomes a really important aspect of your scalability of your performance. But yeah, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule about how much is too much, right? But I think it's usually good to try and flag it in the code and like create a task in your backlog that you'll get to when it makes sense to get to, right? Yeah. Cool. Dan?
What about team splitting? We have team per service.
Yeah.
And then there's also separation between platforms.
Mm-hmm.
In your experience, we're thinking how to evolve that.
Yeah.
Kind of have an idea.
Sure.
What's your experience in platform? Is it vertical versus horizontal separation?
Yeah. So my preference over time has been to try and have teams be pretty vertical and let them be sort of feature-oriented, product-oriented, and so they're empowered that they don't need to do a lot of interaction with other teams to do their usual work, so that they have people who can work on the back end, people who can work on any of the clients they have. My preference is that because I feel like it's easier to move forward in parallel, and just if they have someone who can do iOS, someone who can do Android, someone who can do the web, and then like people who can do back end, like I think that with product and with design, I think that allows you to move forward and it gives you more flexibility.
The thing is that's good for continuous delivery. That's something like Android or iOS, where you have kind of releases and the release cycle is way longer.
Yeah.
There's not that much benefit of parallelism, because at the end of the day you need to integrate many features from different products in only one client and only one release.
Yeah.
You have kind of a release train.
Yeah, I think the benefit in parallelism is not necessarily their speed in that case. It's just organizationally, that you don't have them waiting, that I don't, as the team implementing this feature, have to wait for an Android team to have time in their pipeline to do the Android version of my feature, and then wait for the iOS team to have time to do an Android or an iOS version, and like try and sync all that up. I think that's very challenging for like whoever the product manager is to coordinate, and creates a lot of dependencies between projects, right? Because then if the iOS team gets delayed on this feature, then that bumps this other feature, and it becomes very complex to sort of manage all those dependencies of when you make teams roadmaps interdependent. So how we ended up sort of trying to organize things at 20, and I think it was the best iteration of it, was to have a core team that dealt with sort of the technical aspects of the platform, and sort of worked on a consulting basis with feature teams, helping them on like advising them if there was very technically complex things, and also providing a little bit of flexibility for bandwidth. Like if they had something that was particularly iOS intensive, then maybe someone from the iOS core team, can jump in there for like 6 weeks or something and help them get that out. But they fundamentally, that sort of feature team or product team, however you want to think of it, owns that feature. They just consult with the core team, and the core team deals with the integration and the release of all the code from the team.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Then the core team was the one who cares about integration of every feature from every...
Yeah, so I mean, I think you work similarly to how you would work for the web, right? Like you have some testing, continuous integration, they work on a branch, it has to build, it has to pass code review, and then it gets merged into the mainline project for the iOS client or for whatever, and then you go from there. Yeah.
Now that we are talking about these different teams in vertical, what do you think is better? Like they talk within each other for example, how to use this API, or to have like really good implementation that looks like an external company for us, like these clients consuming this API?
Yeah. Sorry, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's difficult to maintain any sort of documentation like that. I think it's a huge challenge. So yeah, I think that's where having sort of parallel teams where they can own their API as well as the client version of their feature, like, is the most helpful there. I don't know if that answers your question enough, sort of. Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Go forever. It's true, they know. So you said about getting right from the very beginning, sharding of your units.
Yeah.
But considering we don't have that luxury because most startups are really small, one unified thing, do you think the road of actually, do you think the right path is to take what you have and migrate it towards something better, or is it do you need to plan your business model, your domain model again?
Yeah, I mean, I think you always have to sort of take what you have and sort of move to make it better, right? I don't know that you can. I think doing any sort of a major architecture rewrite is very challenging, right? Like it's very difficult. So.
I was wondering whether you prefer one or the other. You have a chance of.
No, I don't think there's any like hard and fast rule, right? Like, but I'm generally very skeptical of making sort of huge changes and sort of trying to repartition everything at once. But yeah, I mean, I think if you have a different model that you think would work better, then yeah, partition a few things that way and then migrate to it over time. Okay, but try not to do stuff that's like a huge monolithic change, right? Yeah.
Question about recruitment. Because I know that in Tuenti you used to recruit a lot of people going out of university, onboarding them. And we are thinking about that, but we have been always afraid of that. You need to onboard those people, teach them, with them. It was something that you did from the very beginning, or you decided at some point?
A little bit. We did it more later when we started doing the code contest type stuff, right? Then we started to get more directly from university, and I mean, we created a sort of a program to train them, right, and put them through a structured training program.
How was that program? People got into teams with the team already, the tech lead. Staff, they were taught by them, or there were some people like.
Well, normally they would have like a mentor assigned to them, not necessarily. I mean, they would have the lead or their manager, but then they would also have a mentor who was just a more senior person that they worked with, and that person was responsible for sort of sitting with them and helping them learn the stuff. And then there was a sort of curriculum, right, and different topics, and sort of on a over a couple months we would do like every Friday we would do a tech talk. That was mandatory for new people, that they had to come, and like someone who was an expert in whatever would give a talk about that, and that curriculum was structured so that over several months in the company you would be exposed to and introduced to all those topics by the senior people in the team. And your manager was responsible for sort of overseeing that you were going through the curriculum, that you were, doing we had some reading and stuff that you had to do, some books that were required, that kind of thing. And they were responsible for sort of overseeing your training and reviewing your performance against that training every month to sort of see if you were making it or not, because our sort of assumption was that people that we were hiring just out of university would have a higher attrition rate. So we were very careful to monitor their performance frequently and look at how they were doing, and then with the expectation that only maybe half or less would actually pass through the program.
Which percentage of junior versus senior? I think it's the right one.
Yeah, so I mean, I would certainly try and have more than half the people on the team experience, right? Because I think especially for new junior people in the company, like people who are junior in general, like they need to have mentorship from people. So apart from just their manager, also a senior person in the team who can sort of be responsible for mentoring them, and that they can answer questions or ask who they should ask this question to, right? So I think that's important. So I'd be very careful about having sort of, more than, I think teams should generally have about at most 6-7 people, and I'd be careful about having more than, say, 2 of them be junior on a team, right? Cool. Anything else? Great. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.